In today's session of Visual JForex, I will make you familiar with the set of variables which are included under the classification of accounts. These are the variables which are very important if we have to design and develop the algorithms, but we don't have to define these variables in an explicit manner, but these variables are rather implicit, and they derive their values from the account which we are utilizing for the algorithm to run. So let us take a look on how these variables impact the whole setup. You will find this on the left hand side panel here, the account, and here on the Visual JForex board. We also have the brief description provided to us for all the variables listed under this section, the account and the variables including the account ID, leverage, equity, leverage, margin cut level, and use of leverage. So all these variables are here, as you can see. Now when it comes to defining this variable, as I said, we don't have to define these explicitly unless we want to, or unless there is a need. Suppose in case of the account ID, if you have multiple accounts under the same algorithm, and for any particular trade, if you want to define the account, then you have to explicitly take into consideration the account ID and set the conditions as such. But otherwise, the given underlying account is the provider for the account ID, and the algorithm picks it up automatically. I will give you an example on one of the algorithm which we are utilizing as a sample. Now in this algorithm, I haven't decided, or you can say defined, the account ID, but this is being derived from the account. This is the demo account, and its ID will be utilized under the account ID, and then the algorithm will run on it. So if I search here, this account ID. So here, this is the variable private string, this is the div type, string type, and the account ID, and whatever is the account ID, that variable value will be taken as the input in case of this variable value. Similarly, for other variables also, we have to rely on the underlying account to get all these values, and these are basically used to set certain conditions after looking at the account parameters, and then trade accordingly. Account currency is also important. You have to take into consideration the account currency, and this is done implicitly by the algorithm. So unless required, you don't have to set this parameter explicitly. If the account currency is USD, then most of the trading settlement will happen in the USD. If the underlying currency is Euro, then the trading settlement will happen in Euro. Coming to the next parameter, equity. Many times, if you want to define the lot size as per the equity, then you have to define that condition explicitly. Otherwise, this parameter is taken into consideration while executing the final order. After considering the account equity, suppose if at any point in time, if the account equity is less than the leverage required for any particular lot size, then that order will be adjusted as per the equity available, and then the order gets modified after taking into consideration this variable. Leverage, you have to define this parameter in the account setting, and that setting value is automatically taken into consideration for the input for this variable. And you can change it also. You can change it there, or you can change it here. So unless you define it explicitly, the whatever is the value defined for the account is going to be taken in consideration. Margin cut levels, these also don't need to be defined explicitly, and this is also derived from the account settings. Margin cut happens when the leverage exceeds the defined leverage, and you have to define what is the acceptable leverage or the margin cut level in the account settings, and then the trading will happen accordingly. If the level is reached, then the position size will be cut down to the acceptable levels, and that's what the margin cut level is all about. Over the weekend and leverage, this is also important parameter. It is usual practice that you cut down on your position sizing even if you want to retain some position in the account, as there is a chance of suffering undue loss or sometimes undue profit. Also, you can say it can turn out both ways, and the wide gaps might happen over the weekend, and we might see the underlying instrument showing gap up or gap down on the Monday. And to avoid any undue damage to account, many times we rely on this over the weekend leverage, which is generally set far lower compared to the leverage which we normally use, and that parameter is also very important. So the algorithm also takes into account this parameter, the variable use of leverage. Now this is dynamic, and it always gives you the level of leverage that is being used at any given point in time. Once the trade execute as per the leverage allowed, if the profit is there, then the use of leverage falls below it as the account equity goes on increasing. But if the underlying trade is in loss, then the use of leverage goes on increasing, and it might even exceeds the allowed leverage, and then in that kind of scenario the margin cut level will come into play. So this is also one of the important parameters, the input variable, which is tracked by the algorithm. Global account, this is the boolean type, and it can be have either yes or no value. So if your account is global, then this will be the parameter with true value. Otherwise, if the account is not global, then the input variable will be defined as false. So these are some of the variables which we don't have to define ourselves every time, but these are very crucial parameters for the trade, and what the kind of order is going to be executed is always going to be dependent on these variables. So that's it for today's session. Whenever you feel like that you need to know more about these variables, you can simply access this panel and read through all the information provided to you. Even sometimes you can try out and try to define this variable explicitly, or you can design and develop any algorithm and then take a look on the variables created. Here you can search out the variables, and whichever variable you want to take a look at, you can access it in your algorithm. Suppose if you are looking for the leverage, all you have to do is find it in the algorithm source code, and here you will find it. So you can see what's going on under the hood by accessing the source code for the algorithm, which is developed using the Visual JForex board, and then we export it in the Java format to the JForex platform. I hope you have been able to understand the account variables, and you will figure out the ways to use these variables to best of your advantage. Thank you all for joining in. Do subscribe to the Dukascopy webinar channel. Goodbye.